Good day, everybody. This is Chris with the Ancient Scholar. I hope this finds you all doing well. Happy New Year. It's a brand new new year. Hopefully 2020 will be a good one. We'll see what happens. So this will be my first video of the year. I'm sitting here in my office, the college, with my breakfast of champions. This is a calorie-free or zero-calorie green tea with ginseng, Arizona. So wonderful stuff. It's actually pretty good. No caffeine, no calories, so good stuff. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the results of a trial of a study that was just published as of today, January 17th, 2020, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA. And before I talk about this trial, I want to give you just a little bit of a context or a little bit of background behind this trial. And it really goes back to 2017. A physician by the name of Dr. Malik was looking at patients he was taking care of. And particularly, these were patients that, among other things, were suffering from sepsis and septic shock. And from what I understand, these are fairly moribund patients. They're very sick. And he noticed in these very sick patients that the particular patients he was taking care of, this was not a designed study. He didn't design a study. He just was looking at patients. So essentially, these are case studies or case reports. And he noticed that in many of them, they were vitamin C depleted, or they had low levels of vitamin C or absorbic acid. And so he hypothesized that perhaps supplementing these patients with absorbic acid would be helpful. It might impact morbidity and mortality. And so he did that in a series of patients, and in several of the patients that received this vitamin C supplement went on to survive their sepsis. And he kind of did some comparison, if you will. Again, it's really hard to make any serious allegations or make any serious conclusions based on just kind of looking at people and this anecdotal. Really, that's just what it is. This anecdote. Hey, I did something and this happened, and maybe the patient's survival was related to vitamin C. Maybe it wasn't, right? You can't really tease that out. It's just kind of an interesting finding. And so based on this, he hypothesized that perhaps in addition to standard therapies such as hydrocortisone, perhaps giving absorbic acid and possibly thiamine supplementation to patients would impact morbidity and mortality. And then he published these case reports in, I believe, Chest Journal in 2017. And it's after that there was a whole lot of momentum that was developed. And there were a lot of people that, in my opinion, overemphasized the power of these initial case studies that Dr. Malik did. And I feel that there was just a little too much momentum created from these initial studies. And it's kind of exciting, right? Hey, we know that morbidity and mortality tends to be very high in septic and sepsis and septic shock patients. So if there's something that can impact mortality and morbidity, then this is a good thing. And the data that came from these case studies was really shocking, and you're talking of a significant percentage of survivability. And so you look at these numbers and you don't really appreciate these are just case studies. This is anecdote. This is N equals a dozen people from one hospital, non-randomized, no controls in place. Hey, this is kind of an interesting thing. And then to base a larger case or a larger medical zeitgeist around this was really underpowered data, in my humble opinion, I think was problematic. And there's just so much momentum now, and so many people are excited. And now there are actually a lot of people out there that, regardless of what the actual data says about this, are just going to believe that vitamin C is a silver bullet for sepsis and septic shock, unfortunately. So with all of that context, I now want to talk about the most current trial that was published, the results from the most current trial, something called the vitamins trial. And this is a randomized controlled trial, is a multi-center. And what they did is they randomized patients. They had a total of 216 patients from approximately 10 ICUs spread across 3 countries from New Zealand, Brazil, and Australia. And of these 216 patients, what they did is they took 109 of them, and 109 of them received the treatment. They received 3 primary interventions: vitamin C, hydrocortisone, and thiamine, and they received these on a Q6-hour schedule. And then 107 patients received standard therapy, which was hydrocortisone or Solu-Cortef. Here in the United States, the trade name Solu-Cortef, and that's just kind of standard therapy. So that's kind of how they designed this. In my mind, there's really one big flaw in this study, and that is that this is what we call an open label study. An open label study means that there was no blinding. So the physicians, the people that were administering the control, which was just a standard therapy, that's a control, the hydrocortisone, and who were administering the treatment, the vitamin C, the hydrocortisone, and thiamine, they knew what patients were getting what. So they were not blind. And really a gold standard of pharmaceutical therapy is to blind everybody. The patients don't know what they're getting, and the researchers don't know what they're getting, and that is a way to try to eliminate bias. Now, you could argue that by making this open label, perhaps the bias would favor the treatment, right? Because, oh, we've got this new treatment and we really want it to work, and I know who's getting it, so maybe there's a little bit of bias that would go in favor of the treatment arm. Okay? I don't know. What do you take from that? I don't know, other than say, okay, it's randomized, that's good. 216 patients, so fairly decent sample size, that's good, but open label, potentially problematic. All right, so it is what it is. So what they did is they had a primary outcome and then about 10 different secondary outcomes. The primary outcome was duration of time alive and free of vasopressor support up to day 7. So they're looking at, how long did they live, how long were they on vasopressors. The vasopressors are just medications that are given to increase blood pressure, heart contractility. So these include things like sepsis, things like norepinephrine, epinephrine, those kinds of substances. That was a primary outcome. There are approximately 10 secondary outcomes in addition to that. And what are the results? Well, the results were null. And that is to say there was no statistical difference between the treatment and the control arm. In fact, in some cases, more patients died. There were higher death rates in the treatment arm as compared to the control arm, right? So if you just look at the raw data, it looks like more people are dying that are getting this vitamin C, hydrocortisone, thiamine treatment. But when we look at the statistics, there's really no statistical difference because there's some statistical wiggle room, and the overlap of significance between the two groups is essentially, it's the same, right? So in virtually every outcome, in the primary outcome and I believe 9 out of the 10 secondary outcomes, there was no statistical difference whatsoever. I believe in one case, the only difference was in something called the SOFA score, and this is an organ failure assessment score that is done on really sick patients. And I believe there was a statistically significant difference of about 1 point, right? 1 point in the SOFA score. And that was the only difference in primary and secondary outcomes between these two arms, right? So what does this tell us? Well, first of all, this study does have some flaws, but it is much more systematic, and it has controls in place, and it has randomization. So it is a much more robust study than the initial case reports that were done. So we can have more confidence in the conclusions of the study. And at this point in time, the conclusions suggest that there really isn't any difference between vitamin C therapy and standard therapy for patients' sepsis and septic shock. Now, with that said, there are several other studies ongoing that are looking at this. Probably the most important from my context is the Victus study, which is looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000, so over 3,000 patients, 40 odd some different centers in the United States. This is a randomized, controlled, and double-blinded trial. The results of that are not yet available. They're forthcoming. So in the near future, we will probably be, I would maybe see something this year potentially come out on the Victus trial. And I would not be surprised at this point in time if the results of the Victus trial more or less mirrored what we see here with the vitamins trial. So I just wanted to give you all an update. This is a New Year's update on something that initially in 2017 seemed really promising and really exciting. And this is often the case in medicine, if I'm to be quite frank, is that something initially appears really promising, and then it just gets completely blown out of proportion, and then you have the press, media gets a hold of it, and you've got, from what I can tell, you've got a lot of people that are maybe not scientifically literate, or maybe just not as interested in providing a more nuanced story, right? Because it seems that in today's age, there's a lot of hyperbole, a lot of clickbait, and so you want to go with the most outlandish kind of title that you can to grab a hold of somebody's attention, and so you have all of these factors that I think set up momentum that really shouldn't exist, and there just doesn't seem to be the kind of nuance and care taken to really talk about these hypotheses and to really discuss, hey, this is really what we're seeing, and this is just anecdotal, and this is very speculative and suggestive, and we just see that a lot, right? You just see this article, this is going to be the next greatest antibiotic, and then you never hear from it again, and that, unfortunately, that's just the way it is in medicine. Is most things that seem to have some promise in the lab never make it to the market, right? That's kind of the nature of the beast, right? It's a lot of failures, a lot of null results go into, right? You've got like 90% or greater in many cases of stuff that may have some initial may be initially beneficial potentially in the lab, goes on to have other problems when you really start robustly looking at it. And I think that might possibly be the case here. Obviously, I'm going to wait at least until the Victus trial. I think that's really the big one. And if the results are null for the Victus trial, I really think at that point in time, we really shouldn't continue wasting precious time, precious resources on something that just doesn't appear to work, or if it does work, the effect size is so infinitesimally small that it just doesn't make sense to continue pursuing that. So anyway, that's the update, and that's kind of my opinion surrounding this, and maybe surrounding other medical advances that get talked about in the common zeitgeist of society. All right, so hopefully you guys found this video helpful, and as always, I hope you have a wonderful day doing whatever it is you'd be doing, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.